It being 5:30 over the clock, I shall call this regular meeting of the Town of Fort Frances Council to order. We'll begin with a territorial acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are within Treaty 3 territory and that the land on which we live and work is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people and the homeland of the Métis Nation. As taught by a Treaty 3 Ojibwe elder, when we speak about the land, we recognize that we are the land. The land is all of us, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous. The land is a collection of our history, our current experiences, and our future together. We offer this land acknowledgement in the spirit of reconciliation, recognizing the historical and contemporary impacts of colonialism while committing to working together as Indigenous and non-Indigenous people to build a better future. Before we get into our meeting, I would like to welcome our audience. We don't usually have the privilege of having an audience, so it's nice to have people here. So welcome. And with that, we'll go to disclosure of pecuniary interest. If you have any, state the general nature therein. Seeing none, we'll go to item 4, which is delegations, and I believe that we have Fred Labrador on behalf of Friends of the Fort Frances Group. Fred?
Mayor Halikas, Council, good afternoon. My name's Fred Lavager, and I'm here representing the Friends of Fort Frances. Our group began as an informal gathering of like-minded people with concerns and worries about the future of our town and the direction in which we, as a community, seem to be heading. At our meetings, we discuss how we might make Fort Frances a more desirable destination where people want to live, work, and raise their families. We ask ourselves what we as individuals can do for the benefit of our town and to improve our community spirit. From the beginning, we made a commitment to keep our conversations positive. We want to help, not attack. Our goal is to work together with Council to help create economic and social development. After a lot of brainstorming, we have reached a point where we feel ready to present our ideas and hopefully begin a broader conversation. We agree that we want more transparency from Council. We, along with the community members, have a lot of questions about issues such as housing, assisted living programs, the status of the Point Park, attracting employment opportunities and investors, the state of the town's infrastructure. I live on 5th Street. And possible consequences of the cutbacks at New Gold. We are deeply invested in the future of this community, and we'd like to know what Council's plans are in terms of tackling these pressing issues, along with many others. We appreciate the recent announcement of a newsletter and the information that comes with it. However, we also want the opportunity to meet with Council and ask questions in a town hall format, to offer feedback and have Council address our concerns directly. We have a lot to offer, both in ideas and manpower. We're willing to rake beaches, plant trees, organize a town cleanup, organize fundraisers, and explore tourism opportunities. We recognize that not all our ideas will be feasible, but we would also like the opportunity to understand why and to receive guidance on the way to direct our efforts. To borrow a quote from Margaret Mead, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Labrador. I'll just go to Council to see if they have any questions. They might have some questions for you. Don't run away. Councillors, do you have any questions of Mr. Labrador? Councillor Bernetta?
Not so much a question, but a comment. It's great to see all of you here. I know a lot of you, and I'm really happy to see that you're investing in our community as we are as council. So I really invite all of you, if you have questions, to call me. Many of you know me, so I'm willing to answer any questions you might have. But I really do appreciate the facts that you guys, you people are really interested in helping. I really appreciate that. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Bernetta. Any other councilors? Questions? I'll just make a brief comment. First of all, Mr. Laverdure, I really appreciated your opening, committed to keeping things positive. That's really refreshing in this day and age and greatly appreciated. I'm sure the clerk filled you in that at a deputation like this, council doesn't make any decisions or take any action at this particular meeting. But we thank you very, very much for your presentation. We thank, I believe they're all with you. We thank your posse, I guess, for coming along. And you're very welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting. In fact, we have a public meeting on taxes coming up next, and you're welcome to stay and ask questions if you like.
Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I will go to presentations. 5.1. This is a public meeting on the 2024 budget presentation by our treasurer, Ms. Dawn Galusha. Take it away, Dawn.
Just sharing my screen here. Maybe. Okay, sorry. Good evening, everyone. Tonight I'm going to present you with the Town of Fort Frances 2024 budget.
Dawn, maybe bring the microphone a little closer.
I'm so short, it's hard. So our budget process, municipalities exist under the mandate of the province. The province requires every municipality to prepare and adopt a balanced budget annually. The purpose of this budget meeting is to explain how the town is financed and how your tax dollars are applied. The 2024 budget process began with administration preparing a capital budget and then presenting the draft to Council on November 20th, 2023. Council approved this budget, which allowed managers to begin purchasing early in 2024, which often saves the town money in being diligent. Administration then began preparing estimates for the operating budget, followed by many meetings for in-depth review of those estimates. This year was exceptionally difficult, with the increases to uncontrollable costs significantly affecting our bottom line. The first draft was provided to Council on February 5th, with the first special meeting held on February 20th. Further meetings were held March 4th and March 18th. Council evaluated and reviewed the challenging requests and approved the 2024 budget on March 18th. Budgeting principles. Each year, administration develops and presents operating, capital, water, and sewer budgets to Council. This year, our challenges were balancing the impacts of the uncontrollable costs increases with maintaining service levels and funding costs associated with operating the town. The budget provides a financial forecast to allow for improved decision-making while maintaining fiscal discipline and service delivery. This year, we were faced with escalating operating costs, which included salaries, benefits, heat, hydro repairs, and escalating uncontrollable costs such as the DSEB apportionment, OPP, and insurance. The goal is always to maintain the long-term financial viability of the town. Aging infrastructure and growing infrastructure deficit are the reality. Thus, we needed to increase the contribution to reserves to offset the deficit this year, and this increase was $173,100 $100. There are four main sources of revenue for a town: taxation, grants, user fees, and other revenues such as interest and rents. And I'll talk about each of those in the next few slides. Property tax is the town's main source of revenue. It consists of two main components: the tax base, or the assessment, and tax rates, municipal and education. The assessment values of property are determined by the Municipal Property Assessment Corporation, otherwise known as MPAC. Due to COVID, the province determined that the assessment values would remain the same at the 2020 values. Municipal property tax rates are set by Town Council every year when it approves the budget and tax ratios. Education rates are set by the Province of Ontario for each tax class. Other special charges, such as business improvement area charges, are separate levies that may be added to tax bills for specific areas. Grants. The town receives conditional and unconditional grants from both the provincial and federal governments. Conditional grants are received for a specific program or service, whereas unconditional grants may be used as council decides to meet the cost of any budgeted current operating expenditure. The Ontario Municipal Partnership Fund is the main unconditional grant that we receive, and we receive $3,447,300 for 2024. The allocation is actually a reduction of $9,600 from the 2023 amount. The town also receives a variety of annual conditional operating grants, as well as capital grants that help fund various road and sidewalk projects. Special project grants. The town applies for operational and capital grants for special projects as they come available, such as Connecting Link funding for road reconstruction, OCIF again for road reconstruction, NOHFC programs for facility upgrades such as Sunny Cove and the Hallett and Awandam project. ICIP has had several streams of funding over the last several years, which we have been successful with, and this includes the large Memorial Sports Centre project. The Ontario Trillium Foundation, we had the funding announcement last week for the Culture Master Plan, and there are many other opportunities that, as they arise, we will apply. So user fees. Many fees increased this year by 3.6%, which is the same as the inflationary increase from the September 22 to September 23 period. The province regulates that fees are based on cost recovery and not to make a profit. The town has the discretion to determine the services for which it will charge a fee. Fees are charged for such things as ice rentals, memberships, landfill tipping, and various other services. Water and sewer rates are also a type of fee, which were approved in February. And again, they have a continued view to looking at the rates, what are the impacts of provincial regulations, and what rates will be necessary to sustain and maintain the existing system to provide for the replacement of water meters and our aging infrastructure. Under the licenses, permits, and fines, this category includes business licenses, lottery licenses, building permits, parking fines. Again, the fees are based on a cost recovery and not to make a profit. Municipal accommodation tax. Effective on January 1st, 2019, accommodation providers in the town were mandated by bylaw to collect and remit a 4% tax on hotel stays. 50% of the amount collected is distributed to the Rainy River Future Development Corporation as the not-for-profit tourism agency. There is a MAT group who determines the use of that funding. The other 50% is for the town use of tourism and economic development priorities. This year, the funds will be used for economic development initiatives and as well as covering some of the added costs of the spray park. Utilities. The town of Fort Frances operates 2 utilities, being water and sewer, which are funded by user fees that they generate. They're definitely part of the cost of living in Fort Frances, but do not affect the property tax rates. The town is also the sole shareholder of the Fort Frances Power Corporation. Electrical rates fully fund the Fort Frances Power Corp. On this slide, you can see the overview of the budgeted revenues for the town for 2024. The total budgeted revenues is $23,622,556. And as you can see from there, municipal taxes account for 55.74% of the revenues. And then tying into that is our operating expenses. Similar to the revenue slide, this shows operating expenses and the percentage thereof. Corporate expenses include non-controllable expenses, such as the DSAB and the health unit. And the total expenses are the same as the revenues because it has to be balanced. So $23,622,556. So a few more stats based on the 2024 budget. This represents the relative percentage for some of the costs that the town incurs. It's always an interesting one because it shows that $39 out of every $100 we collect is for uncontrollable services and costs, and $61 is for the other expenses controlled by the municipality. So on this slide, you can see some of the specific uncontrollable costs at a finer look. So there was no change to the health unit levy for 2024, but we see an increase of $239,764 to the DSAB levy and an increase of $80,870 to our OPP policing contract. Oops. And so this is a summary of our entire budget. You can see revenues and expenses for each divisional area. The capital budget is on there, same with water and sewer. So the total budget for the town of Fort Frances for 2024 is $49,979,240. So property tax rates. Tax ratios are adopted annually by bylaw and define the municipal tax rate of each property class in relation to the residential tax ratio of 1. Essentially, the tax ratios determine the tax burden for each property class. The property tax rates are set annually by town council based on the estimated revenue needed to operate and maintain the town services and its infrastructure. We also have levy restriction in place. The provincial legislation prohibits municipalities from applying municipal levy increases on multi-residential, commercial, and industrial property classes where the ratio is above the provincial threshold. Those restricted classes above the threshold can only be or cannot be increased by more than 50% of the levy increase applied to non-capped properties. So we see that in our multi-residential class. And back to assessment, MPAC is responsible for determining property assessment valuations based on policies as stipulated in the Assessment Act. 2017 began the third four-year cycle, resulting in the phase-in of assessment increases over the four-year period 2017 to 2020, and then immediate effects for any assessment values that had decreased were seen in that taxation year. So 2024 should have been the final year of the next assessment cycle, but with the deferral previously mentioned, properties will still have the same assessment as they did in 2020. Graduated taxation is a provincial tool that the municipality controls. It allows us to create bands where the bands have different tax rates. This was first implemented in 2017. The town had set a tax rate for Band 1, assessment of 0 to 3.6 million, at 60% of the tax rate set for Band 2, which is assessment over 3.6 million. It is self-funded within the commercial class and does not shift any further to another tax class or onto residential property. Tax rate summary. So this is always, one of the most interesting pieces. Everybody wants to know what their tax rates are going to be and what the increase is. So this year, the general operating budget results in a tax rate changes as follows compared to 2023. The impact to the rates takes into consideration both municipal and education portion of the rates, with the residential impact being 5.56% and commercial being 4.93%. So this slide was changed from what I had in the agenda just to remove some confusion. The residential rate comparison now includes municipal and education. So if you have an assessment of $100,000, your increase from 23 to 24 would be $116.64. For $200,000, the increase is $233.27, and for $300,000 is $349.91. So reserves and reserve funds are a critical component of the town's long-term financial plan. They are used to provide financing of capital assets, to provide for future replacement or acquisition of capital assets, and provide flexibility to manage debt. Building of reserve funds is primarily accomplished through allocation of annual operating surplus and operating budget allocation to reserve funds to sustain asset management strategies. The 2024 operating budget allocates $2,361,000 to corporate vehicles and equipment, projects, and building reserve funds, $335,968 to post landfill closure reserve fund. This is much higher than in other years, as we are in a transition year for recycling. Any water and sewer operating budget surpluses also go to the water and sewer reserves. It is estimated this year that we will place $2,761,851 into those water and sewer reserves, and the Canada Community Building Fund, which was formerly our gas tax, our federal gas tax of $469,464, is also directed to reserves and then used on roads projects throughout the year. So it might be a little bit small up there, but as of December 31st, our reserve funds amounted to just over $23 million. In 2024, we are transferring almost $6 million in from those that I had previously discussed, and estimating use of approximately $10 million if all the grants are received and all the projects are completed. This will reduce the reserve funds to an estimate of $20.4 million at the end of 2024. Of this, $9.7 million is for various town-controlled funds. $8.7 million is the utility, water, and sewer reserves, and $1.8 million is in library-controlled reserves. Any questions, comments?
Well, I certainly have a comment. First of all, I want to thank you for that presentation. Municipal finance can be tricky, and you did an excellent job of clarifying and outlining it in an organized manner. So thank you for the work on that, Don. So we'll go open the meeting to questions now, and the way we'll do it is I'll go first to council for questions. Then if there's any people in this room who have questions, you're welcome to ask any questions you have, and then we'll go to folks online for questions. So councillors, any questions? Last chance, councillors. Okay, well, thank you for that. That means Don did an excellent job. Folks, if you have any questions, you're welcome to come to the microphone and ask them. We only ask if you have a question that you just state your name first so we know who you are. Any questions from the audience? Come on up.
Hi, my name is Linda Hamilton, and I have a question, and I probably could answer it myself, but when we see the breakdown of OPP and sewer and water, where does the fire department fit in here?
We'll go to our treasurer, Don.
So the fire department is a portion of in our general operating. Like it's under emergency services as a part of our general operating. So it is definitely part of your tax dollars.
Linda, if you'd like the exact numbers, I can email them to you.
It's just that it doesn't break out. I'm just wondering if it was,
Yep.
and I see it as a department, right?
Yes.
I have another question.
Go ahead.
I think $300,000 more for DSAP. How do you have a look at that? Like, I don't know how that's set up that huge amount of money can.
I'll answer that. That's an uncontrollable expense. The DSAB has the right and the obligation to levy all of the municipalities in the Marine River District based on their assessment. And so they look at what they need for the operating year, and then they decide based on assessment how much of that is going to be apportioned to each municipality. The municipalities have no say whatsoever. We just get a bill, and that's why we're in difficulty these last few years in terms of budget, because we have uncontrollable expenses. We have no say in that.
Same thing with the OPP?
Same thing with the OPP and with the Northwestern Health Unit.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else from the audience before I go to folks online? You're more than welcome if you have any questions. Okay, last chance for the audience. Okay, folks online, your turn. If there's anyone online who has a question about the taxation, just use the button to show your hand. Okay, just one last chance for folks online. If you have any questions at all about the budget, just use the button to put your hand up. Okay. With that then, I'll declare that this public meeting is closed, and we'll go on with the regular council agenda. And once again, many thanks to our treasurer, Don, for an outstanding presentation. Item 6 is correspondence. We have correspondence from the Northumberland County. And I'll speak to this. I was the one who put it on the resolution, and it's coincidental because we just had a question about the DSAB, and this is a DSAB resolution. Being on the DSAB board, I'm very cognizant of how underfunded the DSABs are across the province. And in particular, DSABs administer the Ontario Works program, and they administer the Ontario Disability Support Program. Ontario Works, folks who are getting Ontario Works, their program, their funds have been frozen at $733 a month since 2018. So imagine if you're trying to live on $733 a month. And for the people who are on ODSP, the Ontario Disability Support Program, right now they get $1,376 a month. These are folks with disabilities. The poverty line for those who have disabilities is $3,091 a month. So they're significantly below that. And so this resolution is calling on the Ontario government to rectify this injustice and to make sure that OW and ODSP programs are funded so that people can have a reasonable standard of living. So I'm going to put an oral motion on the floor that Council directs administration to bring back a resolution in support of the Northumberland County resolution. And could I get a mover and seconder for that, please? Councillor Bernetta, Councillor Behan, is there any discussion on that resolution? Councillor Bernetta.
I just have a question about how this is administered. I agree there's been, they've gradually been falling behind with ODSP and Ontario Works. And I'm just wondering how it works in terms of, you know, part of it pays for rent, I understand. So if the rent is higher than what their monthly allocation is, how does that work?
I honestly can't answer that, but I'll get that information from you at the next DSAB meeting.
Okay, so that was part of it. You did mention that the DSABs were underfunded, and I kind of question that because of what we end up being billed.
Yes, and that's only a portion of their budget. It seems like we get billed an inordinate amount, but they have a very large budget because they have a lot of responsibilities. By the way, I'm not justifying the raise that they asked from us, but I do know the work that they have to do. And for example, they're responsible for housing, and we have a housing problem here in Fort Frances as well as across the province. And the way we're funded up here, it's a one-size-fits-all made in Toronto funding formula, as we've all seen, where you're funded on the basis, on a per capita basis. And for small rural northern districts where we have low population, on a per capita rate, we get very little funding. And so it takes a lot of money to build homes. And we just don't have the funds to build the homes that we need. So that type of thing has to be addressed. The funding formula has to change, which doesn't necessarily mean that we would have to pay more. It's the Ontario government that we're lobbying. And this resolution specifically asks the Ontario government to provide greater funding. Thank you for that question, by the way, so I could speak to it. Yes, Councillor Olson.
I just wanted to follow up to Councillor Brunetta's question. So specifically for Ontario Works, it's subsidized with rent geared to income only. So it's a 40 to 60% of that 733 is actually kind of put into the system to pay your rent. Then the remaining 500 to 300 a month, you're going to get on your check at the end of the month. So your living expenses, the highest you could probably see is $450 to $500 if you have a $200 or $250 rental, which isn't possible, but it's usually 40-60 ratio under subsidized only. ODSP, the person has the choice of what they want to do with their housing.
Thanks for that, Councillor Olson. That was very helpful and lessens my homework. Any further questions before I call the question on this issue? All in favor? That's carried and no one is opposed. Okay, that brings us to item 7, council reports on board and committee activity. My report is in writing, but I always like to bring to the fore some positive things that are happening in our community. So I'll go over a couple of positive things. There's lots of good stuff going on in our community. On March 22nd, I was very honored to be invited to attend the Treaty 3 Police Awards and welcoming ceremony, which was held at the Rendezvous. And this event celebrated the remarkable achievements of members of the Treaty 3 Police Service. The theme of the celebration and ceremony was Women in Leadership. And I was invited to speak, and so I brought greetings and best wishes from the town of Fort Frances, its council, administration, and staff. I was very impressed with the meeting. It was well attended, it was well organized. The hospitality was amazing. And I had the privilege of meeting for the first time Treaty 3 Police Chief, Chief Cheryl Gervais, and I was very impressed. Chief Gervais is the first female chief of the Treaty 3 Police Service, and she's stationed in Kenora. We had a bit of a conversation, and it was plain to me that she embodied the theme of the conference, Women in Leadership. We agreed that she comes to Fort Frances frequently and that we would get together when she's in Fort Frances and have some coffee and talk about items of a mutual interest. The other hospitality event that I attended and just loved going to was the Legion Ladies Auxiliary, their district AGM. I had the privilege to be invited by the district commander of the district Legion Ladies Auxiliary to attend their AGM and again bring greetings from the town of Fort Frances. And that was a really enjoyable thing to do. So I brought greetings on behalf of council, our administration, and staff. They had representatives there from Atikokan, Ear Falls, Kenora, Rainy River, Sioux Lookout, and Thunder Bay. And again, those ladies run a good meeting. It was very formal, very well done. I wasn't even allowed to walk up to the podium to speak by myself. I was escorted by the Sergeant at Arms, and I asked her if she would mind attending other events with me, but she declined. What I do want to do is, in speaking to them, I wanted to thank them for all that they do in Fort Frances, so I sat down on the morning of the meeting and just started making a list of all the things that the ladies Legion Auxiliary does. So here's a partial list of some of the things that they do in every community, not just in our community. So they provide the monthly suppers at the Legion, and there's one coming up soon if you're interested in going. Bursaries to high school students, children's programs at local schools. They do hospitality for weddings, funerals, retirements, and other significant events, and we've all attended some of those. They assist with the Christmas hampers. They participate in parades. They support the local food banks. They host Remembrance Day teas. They fundraise for all manner of good causes. They support the local Air Cadets. They put on Veterans Night suppers. They support Trunk or Treat at the library. They support our hospital. They support Rainy Crest. And one that was near to my heart, they support the Spray Park and much more. So I do want to give a shout out to the Legion Ladies Auxiliaries and recognize them for the good works that they do and their contribution to our community and to every community in which they are a part of. And that, speaking of congratulations, that brings me to the next one. I get a lot of requests for congratulatory letters. This is something I really enjoy doing. Just recently, I got a request to provide a letter for a married couple who resides in Fort Frances, and they're going to be celebrating their 70th wedding anniversary. What an achievement. And then I got another request to provide a letter of congratulations for a long-term employee who's retiring, and they wanted to recognize this person for a long-term volunteer service to our community, which I think is appropriate because National Volunteer Week is coming up. So that's something that I really enjoy doing. Another individual I want to recognize, the Fort Frances Power Corporation held an employee appreciation luncheon, which I had the privilege of attending again, and one of the apprentices, Brandon Bodner, was honored for completing his apprenticeship with a straight A average. So congratulations to Brandon for this significant accomplishment. And as was mentioned, I think by our treasurer, Minister Rickford was in town recently to provide more funding for Fort Frances. And I can't thank Minister Rickford and the Trillium Foundation and the Northern Ontario Heritage Fund for funding a number of projects that make our community a better place. So we got money to do a 5-year museum strategic plan and also develop a cultural master plan. My estimate was a little high in my report. We got approximately $85,000 for that. And then finally, we're going to be able to put the Hallett and the Awandam together at our waterfront. And we got approximately $490,000 for that. So we're greatly appreciative to the province for helping us fund these significant projects. And then the last thing that I wanted to talk about is something that's been ongoing for a long period of time, and it's something that you'll be hearing more of. I've had some phone calls from local guides and camp owners, and the issue is that American guides staying on the American side are bringing parties of American anglers who also are staying on the American side of the border directly into Canada, where they're allowed to fish in our waters without spending any money and use our resources, and then they go directly back to where they reside. And so this has a cost to our guides. It's negatively affecting our economy. It's negatively affecting the employment of our guides and the livelihood of our camp owners. And it seems to be, and this is the reports that I'm getting from the guides and the camp owners, that there's minimal supervision in terms of checking if the Americans who are coming into our Canadian waters have work permits, or even checking on how much fish that they're taking. So what I plan on doing, I've been researching the issue, I've been talking to people, I've been talking to guides, been talking to Martin, and I thank him for his help. I'm going to be bringing a resolution to, a notice of motion of a resolution to council probably at the next meeting, if I can get my research done, and ask council to pass that resolution when it comes as a resolution, and ask the Rain River District Municipal Association and NOMA to get involved, because this has to stop. And with that, I will go on to Councillor McTaggart.
Thank you, Your Worship. Good evening. Tonight I want to report on 2 Police Service Board meetings that I've attended. First, on February 23rd, the board met, and at that time, at this meeting, we were very pleased to officially welcome Deputy Clerk Chelsea Gregg as our secretary and Clerk Gabrielle Lecuyer as our alternate secretary. Also introduced to the board at that meeting was Constable Malik and Cadet Cross, who are both new, and they gave a brief personal history and some indication of their choosing why they chose a policing career. I know that the mayor has previously reported on the mobile crisis response team presentation by Canadian Mental Health Association Fort Frances member Christine Cosno and Constable Dutton. But apart from being an excellent update, it exemplifies the great work that's being done in the community when partnerships like this come together. Interventions with local at-risk individuals are handled in a professional manner by the most qualified to manage the situation. This often frees up officers for other tasks. The results are very impressive, and the program is expanded for greater coverage across the district with greater hours of the day and week. Coverage is now often available on weekends and well into the evenings. The second meeting I attended was on March 27th. The Police Service Board received a detailed report from Detective Constable Matt Hebert on the activities and successes of the Street Crime Unit. Detective Constable Hebert presented information on recent seizures and arrests for drugs and weapons in the community. I believe that we're all concerned about all the drugs and weapons in town, and I would like to acknowledge the great work of the Street Crime Unit in trying to apprehend those involved in these crimes. Detective Constable Hebert talked about resources that are available and the joint work done with other law enforcement agencies. Job well done. Staff Sergeant Derek McLean presented the detachment commander's report. He noted that there were 12 officers recognized for various activities during a very busy February, from the bomb threat at the high school to the roundup of 13 individuals on outstanding warrants. There were 2 new constables that joined the detachment in February, Constables Jared Ascott and Desiree Winters, and we'd like to welcome them to Fort Frances. In statistics, I'm pleased to report some nice decreases. In violent crime in February was down 33%, and year-to-date down over 16%. Property crimes down 74%, and year-to-date down 76%. Here's one you'd like: drug crime down 100%, and 75% year-to-date. Motor vehicle collisions in the month of February were down 80%, and a lot of that's attributed to the good driving conditions and nice weather of February, and it's pretty much even for year-to-date. E-tickets, which are printed right out of the patrol car, I learned, are for more than traffic violations. For Fort Frances, it indicates that there were 82 occurrences, resulting in 87 charges, with a large portion of those being for speeding related, but there were a number of other infractions making the list. The call for service billing indicate that there's a 15.5% decrease in February, and year-to-date is down 8.1%, so I'm sure the treasurer will be liking those numbers already. We reviewed the calls for service by time of day and day of the week. I'd like to let you know that as of the 1st of April, the old 1990 Police Services Act has been repealed, and the Community Safety and Policing Act 2019 has replaced it. On advice of the Solicitor General Advisor to Police Service Boards, we will continue on until a district board is able to be formed. The next Police Service Board meeting is April 19th. On February 27th and 28th, I attended a CSPA summit in Toronto to learn more about the new act. Unfortunately, a large portion of the conference was devoted to municipal police boards rather than OPP detachment boards. However, I was able to gain a clearer picture on the roles and responsibilities of the Police Service Board and board members under the new act. On February 21st, I attended the Sister Betty Kennedy Advisory Committee meeting, and I believe that Councillor Mackey's already reported on that meeting. Next meeting is April 17th. On January 25th and March 26th, I attended the Municipal Accommodation Tax Committee meeting. Both meetings were for the 2024 planning and implementation of activities for the balance of the year. And I believe that Mr. Howie, committee chair, will be at our next meeting to give a full update, so I don't want to steal any of his thunder at this point. The next meeting for the MAT committee is to be determined. I unfortunately had to miss the February 20th meeting of the museum because of a conflict with a council budget meeting, and I was unable to connect virtually on the 19th for that meeting. But I would like to, as His Worship has alluded to, I'd like to commend Curator Danielle Marshall for her great work in securing the 2 sizable grants that are listed on tonight's agenda for the Hallett-Awandam project and for the museum strat plan and cultural master plan. Next museum meeting is on April 16th. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor McTaggart. With that, we'll go to the consent agenda. Starting at 8.2, these are council meeting minutes. The recommendation reads, the council approve the regular council meeting minutes of March 25th, 2024, and the public meeting minutes of March 26th, 2024, as presented. 8.3, these are boards and committee meeting minutes. Recommendation reads that the boards and committee meeting minutes be received as information, and we have the BIA minutes, the Police Services Board minutes of February 23rd, Fort Frances Public Library Board minutes of February 15th, and the Fort Frances Public Library Board minutes of February 28th. 8.4 is a recommendation based on something Councilor McTaggart picked up at the last meeting. The recommendation is that the Council of the Town of Fort Frances hereby supports the resolution from the City of Cambridge dated February 14th, 2024, related to catch and release as attached hereto and forming part of this resolution. Similarly, 8.5 is another resolution recommendation that the Council of the Town of Fort Frances receive resolution number 24-031 from the Township of the Archipelago dated February 23, 2024, endorsing the municipality of Wawa's November 7th, 2023 resolution in supporting Bill C-310 and amendments relating to volunteer firefighters and search and rescue volunteer as attached hereto and forming part of this resolution. 8.6, again, an oral resolution from the last meeting. This is the report from the oral motion regarding request for a donation. And the recommendation reads that council support the request for a donation for the Fort Frances High School Chem Free grad for a total of $1,182.21, and that council direct the administration to cover the cost of this donation as part of the council public relations budget. 8.7 is an agreement under the Community Safety and Policing Act, and the recommendation reads that council approval of report AR-0552 will agree with the recommendation of administration to enter into a Section 17 agreement with His Majesty the King and Right of Ontario as represented by the Solicitor General for the use of special constables to provide court security services, and that a bylaw be passed authorizing the mayor and clerk to execute the agreement on behalf of the corporation. 8.8 is the Fort Frances Museum Strategic Plan and Culture Master Plan, and the recommendation reads the council approval of report AR-24-0555 will agree with the recommendation of administration to enter into an agreement with the NGL Group Limited for the development of the Fort Frances Museum and Culture Center 5-year strategic plan and the Town of Fort Frances Cultural Master Plan, and that an authorizing bylaw be prepared allowing mayor and clerk to execute the agreement on behalf of the corporation. 8.9 is the proposed legal agreement. The recommendation reads that council approval of report AR-24-0556 will agree with the recommendation of the administration to enter into an agreement with the Northern Ontario Heritage Fund for project funding for the Hallett and Awandam project, and that an authorizing bylaw be prepared authorizing mayor and clerk to execute the agreement on behalf of the corporation. 8-10 is the wastewater treatment plant annual report. Recommendation reads that council receive report AR-24-0543 presenting the wastewater treatment plant 2023 annual report prepared by the Ontario Clean Water Agency, and that at this time the staff of the wastewater treatment plant should be acknowledged for their effort and hard work to ensure safe and compliant operation of the wastewater treatment plant. And I do want to do that, and I do want to mention them by name. So at this time, I would like to acknowledge the efforts and hard work of the following staff members during this period. Jeff Pierce, who's our interim environmental superintendent. Kelly Cunningham, who's the wastewater treatment operator, class 3, overall responsible operator. Dale Hughes, who's the wastewater treatment operator, class 2, operator in charge. These employees work diligently on a daily basis to ensure the safe and compliant operation of the wastewater treatment plant. We're very, very fortunate to have employees of this caliber. And that brought us to the conclusion of the consent agenda. So, councilors, would you like to pull any? Wow. Okay. So, I have a recommendation then that reads that council approval of the consent agenda as follows. Agenda items 8.2, 8.3, 8.4, 8.5, 8.6, 8.7, 8.8, 8.9, and 8.10. Mover and seconder, please. Councillor Olson, Councillor McTaggart. Any discussion? All in favor? Carried. No one is opposed. Okay, we move to item 9, which is Administration and Finance Division reports. 9.1 is the external communication policy revision brought back. Just before we do that, I want to thank Chelsea, our communications officer and deputy clerk. There were some questions last time that needed clarification, and I think that Chelsea did an admirable job in clarifying. So I'll put this on the floor for discussion. The recommendation reads, the council review the external communications draft policy and direct that a bylaw be brought forward for adoption, and that the external communications draft policy supersede policy 1.1 media communication. Could I get a mover and seconder for that, please? Councillor Behan, Councillor Bernetta. Any discussion? Councillor Bernetta.
I just want to thank you, Chelsea, for clarifying that language I brought up last time. It's much clearer now. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Bernetta. I'll call the question then. All in favor? That's carried. No one is opposed. 9.2 are financial statements, and the recommendation reads, the council received the attached financial statements as report AR-24-0560 for the general water and sewer funds for the period ending March 31st, 2024. Could I get a mover and seconder, please? Councillor McTaggart, Councillor Mackey. Any discussion? Councillor Behan first.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you to our Madam Treasurer. I read all the way down to the bottom, and I saw town of Fort Frances total 2. So I think that should be 23 million or something, because it shows a variation from the budget of 201 million%. At the very bottom of the, is it 14? Page 15, yeah.
So through the chair, it looks like I just don't have the budget balanced perfectly, so it's out by $2, which is where the 2 comes from at the very bottom line.
Okay,
That's it, yeah.
thank you.
Councillor Bernetta?
Sorry, I was voting in favor. I was jumping the gun.
That's quite all right. I love your enthusiasm. Any further questions? Okay, and now we'll call the question. All in favor? And that's carried. No one is opposed. Okay, we're going to need some input on the next one. This is the Community Services Division reports, and it's a policy update. So I'll put this on the floor for discussion. Resolution reads that Council receive the information outlined in report AR-24-0553 to adopt the suggested edits to the Facility Rental Policy 2.5 as presented, and that Council direct administration to present an updated 2024 user fee bylaw, including new fees for dedicated room use and storage space at the Memorial Sports Center, to Council for approval, and that Council direct administration to roll out policy updates according to option 1 as outlined in the analysis/options section of report AR-24-0553. So, mover and seconder, please. Councillor Olson. Councillor Behan. Okay, discussion. Oh, Councillor Olson,
I'll just go ahead and jump in here.
please do.
First of all, I just want to acknowledge Mr. Young's hard work on this very thorough policy. But I did, after reading it, I did ask a few questions to Mr. Young as well as the CAO in regards to some of the policy changes. So I know with this practice, we're now formalizing the storage space and dedicated use space. And I know that's something new. It hasn't been a historical practice in the community. And I've already received commentary and questions of, you know, where are we going in the direction of this and things like that. I did, though, want to see in this, and this is a question that I wanted to put forward tonight, because I see there are suggested annual costs based on square footage. And this is the first time in a long time in a report I haven't seen a regional comparison. And so my question was, you know, are we aligned with other communities within the region that have large sports centers like Kenora, Dryden has a smaller facility, but they have the 2 surfaces in with the expansion project. So that is one of the questions that I had for tonight was where these proposed fees came from and if they are in alignment with the rest of the region, considering this is new. You know, are we on the higher end, on the lower end for fee for service for some of these associations that are using the space?
I'll lead off on the answer, and then I'll go to Manager Young. You'll have noticed in the rather extensive and excellent report that the costs were put out there. As you mentioned, we haven't done it before, and that council can change them to anything that they like. But I don't know if there are comparators. So for that, I'll go to Manager Young. Are there any comparators? Are other folks doing this?
Thank you through the chair. So with transparency, I did not reach out to Dryden and Kenora to confirm if they do have dedicated use space and if they charge for that dedicated use space. The report is built off of past experience from recreation facilities that I have worked in up until today, where dedicated use space is charged out similar to our meeting rooms and or our ice allocation pieces. If council wishes, I can take the report back and add that piece in and do that due diligence if that is a piece that council wishes to direct us to do.
We'll engage in some further discussion because this is an important piece and we do want to get it right. So it's something that we don't want to rush. So hold that thought. Further discussion or questions? Councilor McTaggart?
Thank you, Worship. Through you. Will there be any groups impacted by this policy that are in mid-season or not able to adjust their registration or membership fees?
Thank you, and through the chair. So the plan to roll this out is now in line with the end of our season for our user groups. The groups that currently hold dedicated use space and storage space within the facility are ICE users. And so we're at the end of their season. In the communication section of the report, it does outline how we will roll this out in order to have the answers for the groups to have July and August to prepare with their new spaces, ready for their seasons to start back again in September.
Thank you, Councilor McTaggart. Thank you, Manager Young. Councilor Brunetta.
Thank you, Your Worship. I don't have an issue with charging for storage space. Any place that my employer had rented in the past, we paid for not only, you know, our office spaces and our storage areas, but we also paid for common areas, so a portion. So I think it makes a lot of sense to do it that way. I also think that our user groups will appreciate having a 3-year contract so they can see the stability of their fees over certain time periods. So I'm good with the direction this is going.
Further questions or comments? Go right ahead, Councilor Olson.
I'm sorry, Mr. Young. Okay. The other part that I was looking at too within the policy was on page 10, and it was now within the new policy, the Rainy Lake Square has been brought into the rental space. So I just wanted clarity based off of what I was reading, because there was a huge issue last year around insurance and liability. So I just wanted clarity on that. So the Rainy Lake Square, if it's considered a rental, would it be rented under a particular person or organization to run the market component of it? And would that person be able to subcontract the spaces? Or is the expectation again that everyone would have to hold a $2 million liability insurance?
Go ahead.
That was my first question. Thank you.
Okay, let's take
Yes.
one at a time. Go
Through
ahead.
the chair, and let's just clarify that we're doing page 10 of the report. Yes, okay. So the rental of the Rainy Lake Square is governed already through our schedule of fees bylaw. It's broken down into different scenarios within that bylaw. A scenario if it is a private event that is held for invited guests, there's a charge to rent that space. If it is a public event that is open to the public coming in, there's no charge to rent that space. So that's that first piece of your of the question on the fee that's associated with it. The policy update on page 10 is for all municipal events and all events that happen on municipal owned property. There are groups out there that do special event insurance, one-day rentals for these groups to make that open and accessible. The town does continue to move forward with organizing the Market Square that happens on Thursdays. But if there is another group that wants to come in and run an event in the Rainy Lake Square, we would ask that they would have insurance and would indemnify themselves from the town. That's to protect their event that they're running, as well as protect the municipality of anything that may happen during that event. This addition to the policy came from a lot of challenges that administration had been facing over this past year, with a lot of events and groups, not just at the Rainy Lake Square, but in a lot of our areas, of not necessarily holding proper insurance, businesses or license or permits for their events. And the town or administration of the town sees that as a risk management piece, that we need to put this into a policy. So when we're having those conversations with those renters and those user groups, that we have a policy to fall back on, as opposed to a standard practice as we've been doing in the last year. I hope that addresses your question.
Thank you, Manager Young. Further questions or comments? Councillor Ian.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you to Manager Young. Notwithstanding what the actual cost may be, maybe still to be determined, you're saying here that council should consider if the rate is locked in for 3 years or is subject to annual CPI increases. I'm wondering if administration has a preference to that, because to me, once you sign a contract, it should be locked in, but at the same time, most of our other user fees do have the application of the CPI each year. So I'm just wondering which way you're looking at going. Thank you.
Thank you, and through the chair to Councillor Behan. That's a conversation that we will have once we update the schedule of fees. That would be a condition that would be put into the schedule of fees bylaw if council chooses to lock that in for CPI or not. And so that conversation comes from if council wishes, again, to see that increase, because we do an annual CPI increase to the entire schedule of fees bylaw. If we write that in there that we want to freeze that rate for 3 years so that we keep that into the agreement, that's why that consideration is put in there. But that conversation and decision will happen once that schedule of fees bylaw gets brought forward.
Further questions or comments? Councillor McTaggart.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to Mr. Young. Have you had any discussion with the dedicated use room fees with the current, I see in your consultations, you've talked to some groups, but not all, and what financial constraints is going to put on the other groups?
Go ahead.
Thank you, through the chair, to Councillor McTaggart. I have engaged in conversation with the majority of our user groups. When it comes to the Fort Frances High School, that represents Muskie Boys, Muskie Girls, as well as the Fort Frances Hockey Academy, those conversations have not been as in-depth as some of the other user groups that are put on here. However, those conversations had happened when this project started about 6 months ago, and we've been in constant conversations about the impacts that it would have on their groups, which is what led to the different options being added into the report for consideration, because those conversations with the user groups, they have different perspectives on how to roll out the policy based on how it would affect them on how we roll out the policy. None of the groups have come forward against the decision to monetize those spaces or to move forward with that piece. It was more how they're going to ensure that they can bring their voice to the table of keeping their space and or moving into a more desired space and what that may look like.
Thank you. Further questions or comments? Okay, I'll make a comment then. Just commenting on Councillor Brunetta's comment on the user fees. I'm at the Sportsplex on a regular basis, and then in reading through the report, it appears that there's a number of niches and nooks and crannies where stuff is stored. And I think in some cases, we're not even sure whose stuff it is. And I think that some of the user groups also have a significant amount of storage space. So one thing I think that monetizing by square foot will do is it will focus groups on how much storage they actually need, because you're paying now for the storage. And it will also, I think, flush out some of the people or some of the groups that may have forgotten that they've got stuff in little nooks and crannies, and I know administration is not sure who it belongs to. So I see this as a good thing. I think it's going to make it fairer for people to access storage, because storage that isn't needed won't be used, and maybe another group requires more storage and is willing to pay for it. So I think that's good. I'll poll council later as to what they do, but I think your proposed fees are reasonable to begin with. With anything that's brand new, my policy is always, well, let's try it and see how it works, and maybe we need to adjust it down the road. So that's my comment on that. I have another comment to make, but I'll stop in case anyone else has a thing. Anyone else? Okay, the other comment I wanted to make was you presented us with two options, and both had some good pros and cons. I'm a firm believer in fairness and equity. So when I looked at option 2, right off the bat, I thought, well, okay, that's a fair way to do it. But then I had a concern because I looked at the list of all of the user groups, and my question to you, Manager Young, is, with option 2, is it possible that user groups who now have a designated room might lose that?
Thank you, and to the chair. So the simple answer on that is yes. There is a possibility. We did run the metrics, so the report reads as based on their weekly ICE allocation. That list came out into the order that's presented in the report. We looked at the total revenue generated by the user group in 2023. The list stayed very much the same. We looked at every permit for the total amount of hours that each of those permits were actually booked for, and the list stayed very much the same. When I say very much the same, I want to clarify that when we look at our minor hockey, they were very, very far away from any other group in terms of the revenue and the amount of ice that they're using. When we then looked at girls and women's hockey, there was a significant drop from minor hockey, but still significantly higher than the next section of groups on the list. When we looked at the Hockey Academy, Muskie boys and Muskie girls, they're lumped sort of into one category, even though they're 3 separate groups that utilize that ice. And when it came to the Junior Lakers and the Border Skating Club, with consideration for the Hockey Academy, Muskie girls and Muskie boys, they're all within 10 hours of permits, under $2,000 in revenue, and within 5 hours of weekly ice allowance. So depending on which metric we want to write that list for, there is a potential that we have dedicated users right now that will lose their spot if the groups that are higher on the list choose to rent that space.
Thank you for that. I greatly appreciate it. So any other questions or comments? Yes, Councillor Mackey.
Thank you, Your Worship. To Mr. Young, so you have all this ice rented out, you're counting hours, but are you counting man hours? Like to say you got it rented out to the hockey academy and they have 2 people out there for an hour, taking up valuable ice time for 2 people when there's other groups that may not use it as often, but get more bodies on it in that time. Did you take that metric into account?
Through the chair, it's difficult to determine exactly which metric we want to use to put on to this case, because there is an endless list of metrics that we could put on. For example, we do have some user groups that are on the list that choose to purchase gym memberships for all of their users. That's an additional revenue that comes into the center, but them having a dedicated space in the center is not impacted on if they're using the gym. So that's one example. Or when we look at in your example of the academy that has 1 hour of ice time, that's 1 hour of ice time 5 days a week. They don't have a dedicated dressing room space. I don't think that they would be interested in one because the dressing rooms that we already have that come with that ice allocation are sufficient for their use, and they have banks of lockers and other storage facilities that they would utilize. So we can twist the metrics to find out whichever hierarchy of list we choose, and that's why option 3 is also in the report. If council wants to suggest to the administration what that hierarchy looks like or exactly what metrics it is that we want to use to find out that exact list, especially when we get to that middle group that are within a couple of hours or within a couple of $1,000s of each other, that would help administration to make that decision. So this was one metric that I found was the most equitable to bring forward into the report, but at council's direction, we can definitely put other metrics in to find out exactly what that list looks like.
And that is an option for council. If you have some questions or some thoughts or some ideas, we can postpone the decision of this while you get those questions answered or while you get the thoughts solidified in your head. So I'm going to ask council then what you'd like to do. We can vote on it tonight as it is. I think you've done a marvelous job. I think it works the way it is, but it might not work the way council wants it to work. Or we could postpone it and get an answer to Mandy's question, and I'm seeing nods already. I'm seeing nods. So I've got a majority of nods, so I'll actually translate that into a resolution. I'll ask for, first of all, before we get the resolution, we need to decide on a date. You have to be specific. When do we want to bring this back? Somebody have a suggestion for a date? I don't have a calendar in front of me. Yes, Councillor Mackey?
If I may, I guess perhaps we could ask Mr. Young how much time he thinks he needs to reach out to all the other communities to find out what kind of pricing, if any, they have, so he can do that report back to us. And if it's a matter of a half a dozen phone calls, perhaps the next meeting would be appropriate.
Yeah, I would suggest either the next meeting or the meeting after. What's reasonable for you?
I think that the next meeting makes the most sense with the timeline of being able to roll out this policy for our user groups.
Okay. So the resolution reads to postpone the decision on this until the next council meeting. And can I get a mover and seconder on that? Councillor Mackey, Councillor Olson. Any discussion on that? I'll call that question then. All in favor? That's carried and no one is opposed. You got that already? I'm fast. Okay. Thank you for that. Again, some good discussion, very thoughtful. And yes, Manager Young?
Sorry, if I may, can we just clarify that we're looking for the cost comparison for other places? And did you want me to bring forward different metrics solutions as well, or is that just the one piece that we're looking
Well,
for?
I'll ask councilors. My thought was that councilors could, if they have questions, could ask their questions in that time. But councilors, do you want some different metrics brought forward? No, they're saying no. So they'll, if they have questions, they're going to seek answers, probably from you or the CAO. Okay. Brings us to item 11, which is Planning and Development Division reports. So the resolution reads that council approval of report AR-24-0554 agree to the recommendation of administration to approve, 1, the application C1 2024 for site-specific official plan amendment to change the designation from employment to downtown business area at 301 and 325 Nelson Street North Mill Complex, PC. 2, the abbreviation B1 2024 for site-specific zoning bylaw amendment to change the zoning from light industrial M1 to new mixed-use MU zone at 301 and 325 Nelson Street N Mill, height of 25 meters. N Mill Complex PC, and further permit a site-specific exemption to Lot 2 for a maximum building height of 25 meters. And finally, item 3, the application of A1 2024 for plan of subdivision of the lands at 301 and 325 Nelson Street North Mill Complex PC to subdivide into 3 separate parcels for future development, and further direct administration to proceed with preparing a plan of subdivision agreement with the applicant's party. And council will remember that we had last week a public meeting on this. So I'll put this on the floor. I need a mover and seconder. Councillor Mackey, Councillor Bernetta. Any questions, councillor, or discussions? Councillor McTaggart?
Thank you, Worship. Through you to Mr. Burrows. On page 4 in the conclusion, am I understanding it correctly that the zoning bylaw amendment and the plan of subdivision will not be registered until the environmental assessment is complete?
Go ahead.
The chair?
Yep.
So we would like to bring the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment to the next council meeting for enactment through bylaw. But the draft plan of subdivision is just approving it in draft. With the approval for the plan of subdivision, we would be proceeding with negotiating with the applicants to determine conveyances, road dedication. And with that, we would also be opposing conditions to the approval of the agreement, which would include the record of site condition for proceeding. That record of site condition is going to be required prior to development of these sites. But we can't enforce it as a condition onto the zoning bylaw or official plan amendment.
Follow up, or are you good?
Just do have another question.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Does this development have the potential of reopening streets that we have closed off?
Go ahead.
Again. So all of the road allowances on the property are owned by the property owner at this time. Part of with the plan of subdivision agreement is we would be looking to negotiate the conveyance of Portage Avenue, subject to them rebuilding and redeveloping it prior to conveying it to us. That way, for the developments that they have proposed, we'd be able to allow them to tie into municipal infrastructure for their proposed developments. But at this time, it's not conveyed over to us. That would be negotiated through the plan of subdivision agreement.
Yes.
Would that involve Sinclair Avenue too? Or Sinclair Street?
Sinclair Street?
Yeah.
So there is a proposal. Well, part of their proposal is not conveying over St. Clair Avenue and keeping it as a private roadway and access way. With that, it's due to the fact that they don't, at this time, feel that they need to have services running through it, and they do want to keep it as a private access between the different lots.
Yeah. Thank you both. Any further questions or comments? Okay, with that, I will call the question. All in favor? That's carried. No one is opposed. Okay, that brings us to item 11.2. Recommendation reads that council approval report AR-24-0561 will agree with the recommendation of administration to approve the project in principle in the amended location and for the town to enter into a land use agreement with Mr. Jordan de Gagne for the use of the wharf area for purposes of a splash zone inflatable water park. I need a mover and seconder, please, to get that on the floor. Councillor Bernetta, Councillor Behan. Questions or comments, councillors? Councillor Olson.
I do have some commentary, I guess, around this recommendation tonight, and it's a few things. So I want to make it clear that I'm not opposed to the splash zone. I think it's a wonderful thing that our community needs. However, I do have a couple concerns. One, there's the big project being carried out right now with our missing and murdered children in that area. And I did speak with the CAO earlier, and he did advise that the location that was originally presented in delegation wasn't actually over on the Seven Oaks side, that it was more to the other side. I would like to see something of the exact location that is being proposed, because there is a lot of work being done in that area. I also, it's not clear to me, I guess, how the town would be in a position to enter into an agreement while we're still in litigation over the lands. So I do have a concern about that also, how we enter into agreement with somebody when the lands are still in dispute. So that's something else that I just wanted to bring up tonight. And I guess for me tonight, I'm not favorable to move this proposal forward, even if it's just in principle.
So I was going to ask the CEO if he wanted to respond to any of those comments.
Thank you, through the chair. So there's a map attached to the report that does show the initial proposed that we understand from Mr. de Gagne, as well as two potential options of site location. The intention behind our proposed site locations really is in an effort to have the water access component of the development housed within the two-chain road allowance. And so the idea behind the land use agreement would be for that portion of it coming basically off the shoreline and into the water. Beyond that, that is a matter to be handled by other agencies like M&R and Transport Canada and things of that nature. So that's all of that still yet to be determined in terms of what the shoreline operations are going to look like, depending on the location. And then we will come back with likely another report once we have a better understanding of what the shoreline access pieces are going to look like and a location, and then come back with another report talking about what other sorts of implications that has to the town and what a potential land use agreement might look like.
You have a follow-up?
Again, it's just more commentary, but I think that I would appreciate seeing that in this report, just with some consultation with Agency 1 around some of those things, because I think it's a half land, half water concern. So that's just where I'm at tonight. It's not that I'm not okay with the splash zone itself. I just I'm not sure of this idea of being able to approve it in principle without having some of these answers.
I'll go back to the CAO.
Thank you, through the chair. I have had very preliminary discussions with Agency 1 on this, and I am hoping to have a more wholesome meeting with them this week. So hopefully at the next council meeting we can have a more wholesome update as well.
Anyone else? Questions? Comments? Councillor Behan?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through you. I think one of my concerns is just the parking and congestion along. I don't see a a real good area for parking. It's so narrow as it is, and they have it along Calder Drive here, and then they have parking area A, which is quite a distance away. You talk about shuttles maybe, but then you got to cross that train track, as we all know, as the busiest crossing in the U.S. Via rail in Canada. So it's going to be a lot of train traffic that's going to disrupt there. So I'm a little bit concerned about the parking area. And then when you say parking area for B, if I'm not mistaken, that falls on that triangular piece of land that I think Agency 1 is looking at getting back through the return to reserve process with the federal and provincial government. So I'm not sure that property would be available for parking, in my mind. Thank you.
CEO Rob.
Thank you. I mean, we can unfortunately only park vehicles where we can park vehicles, and we've tried to look at the area that we have available and how we can accommodate some parking. There unfortunately is no perfect answer given this location. The best opportunity is the fact that Calder Drive in that area is a one-way. So we do have vehicles only going in one direction. However, as you had mentioned, Councillor Bean, the train crossing is definitely an area of concern. And not only just navigating it, but having the pedestrians navigating it safely and things like that. So parking is a not ideal situation in this location for sure.
Further questions, comments? Seeing none, I will call the question then. All in favor? That's carried. But anyone want to register opposed? Okay, 2 opposed. Okay. Motion carries. Okay, that brings us to item 13. There is nothing under Operations and Facilities Division report. So bylaws. 3 tonight. Recommendation is that the following bylaws be introduced and read, finally passed, signed by the mayor and clerk, sealed with the corporate seal, and become law forthwith. Bylaw 21-24 being a bylaw to establish tax ratios for prescribed property classes. Bylaw 22-24 being a bylaw to adopt the estimates of all sums required for all municipal purposes during the year 2024. And bylaw 23-24 being a bylaw to authorize the levy and collection of taxes for all municipal purposes in the town of Fort Frances for the year 2024. Mover and seconder on that, please. Councillor Bernetta, Councillor Bean. You guys are getting a little sluggish. Any discussion? Seeing none, calling the question. All in favor? That's carried. Okay, that brings us to item 15, which is moving in camera. And I'll put a resolution on the floor that council now meet in camera in order to address a matter pertaining to 1, update on the JTJ litigation. That comes under 239E, which is litigation or potential litigation, including matters before administration tribunals affecting the municipality or local board. And F, advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose. Mover and seconder, please. Councillor McTaggart and Councillor Olson. Any discussion? All in favor? That's carried. And for those of you at home, we will now meet in camera downstairs, and I will return and report out as soon as we're complete. Okay, we are now in open session. In closed session, we received a report and an update on the JTJ litigation. We also reviewed the closed regular meeting minutes of the March 25th, 2024 meeting, and I have a resolution on that, which says, that council approve the closed meeting minutes of March 25th, 2024 as presented, and I need a mover and seconder for that. Councillor Behan, Councillor McTaggart. Any discussion on that? Seeing none, all in favor? That's carried. No one is opposed. That brings us to item 17, which is the confirmatory bylaw. And the recommendation reads that bylaw 2424 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the Council of the Corporation of the Town of Fort Frances be introduced, read, and finally passed, signed by the mayor and clerk, sealed with a corporate seal, and become law forthwith. Mover and seconder on this one, please. Councillor Bernetta, Councillor Olson. Any discussion? All in favor? That's carried, and no one is opposed to that. And finally, that having reached the hour of 7:16, this meeting of the Council of the Town of Fort Frances be now closed. Mover and seconder, Councillor McTaggart, Councillor Mackey. All in favor? It's carried. And again, I thank you, Councillor, for some good discussion this evening. Thank you very much.